The ice is cracking like bone. 1,000 lives depend on a dog too old to lead, and a man too frozen to feel his own face. This is the true story of the race against the void. The world is a screaming wall of white. Lay on hard, Seppala cannot see his own outstretched hand. The wind is a jagged blade of ice that cuts through fur and skin, freezing the very breath inside his lungs. Underneath the runners of the sled, the ocean is waking up. It does not sound like water. It sounds like 1,000 cannons firing at once, deep beneath the crust of the black, freezing sea. The lead opens with a sickening, wet groan. A chasm of obsidian water yawns wide, swallowing the starlight. The ice floe beneath the dog shudders and tilts, beginning its slow, lonely drift into the void. Togo screams. It is not a bark, but a raw, primal sound of a creature facing the end. The dog is a shadow against the swirling snow, his paws clawing for purchase on the slick, dying ice. Seppala lunged forward, his fingers fumbling with the frozen leather of the traces. His mittens are encrusted with a thick layer of rime. He drops the guideline. The rope vanishes into the dark freezing slush. Every muscle in the lead dog's body bunches and shudders. Togo leaps. He is a gray ghost suspended over a bridge of nothingness. The harness snaps with a sound like a gunshot, echoing across the Norton Sound. The team is sliding backward toward the churning water. Seppala sinks to his knees, his face a mask of frost and terror. He watches his life as work slip toward the edge of the world's end. Togo reaches back into the freezing mush, his teeth bared and bloody. He grips the loose lines, his neck muscles bulging as he anchors 20 dogs against the pull of the hungry, black-bearing sea. How did they end up on a crumbling raft of ice in the middle of a killer storm? What madness drove a man to risk everything on the instincts of a single, aging dog? The terror on the ice was not the beginning. It was the destination. To understand the nightmare on the Norton Sound, one must look back to the quiet, dying rooms of the Nome hospital. Diphtheria is a silent thief. It began with a few children coughing in the dark. Soon, the town realized a shadow had fallen over every cradle. The serum they needed sat over 600 miles away. Between the medicine and the dying lay a white hell. The trains were frozen. The planes could not fly in the screaming gales. Only the dogs remained. Only the sleds could bridge the gap of death. Lay on hard, Seppala stood in the dim light of his kennel. He was 47 years old, a man of iron and experience. He did not look for a hero in the mirror. He looked for a leader. He chose Togo. The dog was 12 years old. In the world of mushers, 12 is an age of retirement and slow walks by the fire. Togo was small, weighing only 48 pounds. Many doubted the choice. They saw a dog past his prime. Seppala saw the only heart capable of outrunning the Reaper. He harnessed 20 huskies, but his eyes never left the gray coat of his led dog. The departure was not grand. There were no cheers, only the heavy silence of a town holding its breath. The mission was clear. They were the mercy quest. They were the last line of defense. The optimism of the first mile was a thin mask. Seppala knew the math of the tundra. Every hour spent on the trail was an hour closer to a child's last breath in a cold room. The trail to the handover point was a gauntlet of rising winds. The temperature plummeted toward minus 50 degrees. The air turned into a cloud of needles that shredded the lungs with every gasp. As they reached the coastline, the path split. One road stayed on the shore, safe and long. The other road cut straight across the shifting, Treacherous ice of the sea. It was the shortcut of kings. Seppala looked at the horizon. He could feel the pressure of the storm building in his marrow. The safe route would take too long. The children in Nome did not have days. They had hours. This was the point of no return. He turned the sled toward the frozen water. He chose the risk. He chose the ice. He committed his life and the lives of 20 dogs to a gamble. The transition from land to sea felt like stepping into another world. The ground beneath the runners began to thrum with a low, rhythmic vibration. The earth was gone. Only the skin of the ocean remained. The sun vanished behind a wall of slate-colored clouds. The sky became a bruised purple, then a deep, suffocating black. The first gusts of the great storm arrived like a physical blow to the chest. There was no turning back now. The wind had already erased their tracks. They were moving into the heart of the beast, propelled by the hope that the ice would hold just long enough to pass. Togo leaned into the harness, his paws digging into the slick surface. He did not know about the medicine. He only knew the scent of the man behind him and the cold hunger of the gale. The first crack in the distance was as loud as a rifle shot. It echoed across the flats. A warning from the deep. The Mercy Quest had become a race against a collapsing world of white. The wind speed climbs until it reaches 60 miles per hour. It is no longer a breeze. It is a solid wall of shrieking ice that slams into the sled like a falling mountain. The world dissolves. Sky and ground merge into a single, blinding sheet of white. Lay on hard, Seppala squinted until his eyes were narrow slits. But the tundra had stolen his sight. He was blind in a kingdom of salt. He had made the choice. He had left the safety of the shoreline for the shortcut across the shifting sea. Now, the shortcut was becoming a trap. Every direction looked exactly like the one they had just left. The trail was gone. It had been swallowed by the drifting snow in a matter of seconds. Seppala felt the hollow ache of the lost. He no longer knew where the land ended and the deep water began. His internal compass failed him. The swirling vortex of the storm spun his senses until his head throbbed. He looked down at his hands. They were stiff blocks of ice, barely able to grip the sled handles. He realized with a cold jolt of terror that he was no longer the navigator. He was merely a passenger on a vessel made of wood and bone. His life was now in the paws of another. Togo did not hesitate. The old dog kept his head low, his nose inches from the ground. He was hunting for a scent that should not exist in this howling vacuum. He was looking for the ghost of a trail. The sled hit a pressure ridge. The wood groaned as it tilted 40 degrees. One runner lifted into the air. Seppala threw his weight to the side, his boots sliding across the slick, jagged surface of the pack ice. The physical toll began to manifest in every breath. Seppala felt the skin on his cheeks tighten and then go numb. The frost was claiming his face, turning his flesh into a hard, white mask of dead tissue. The dogs were struggling. Their fur was matted with frozen spray. Some began to limp as the ice crystals cut into the webbing of their paws. The sound of their labored panting was a rhythmic, desperate saw. Visibility dropped to zero, a true whiteout. Seppala could not even see Togo at the front of the line. He felt the tension in the rope, the only umbilical cord connecting him to the world of the living. The ice beneath them was not stable. It groaned with a deep bass frequency that vibrated through the soles of Seppala's boots. The sea was moving. The floor of the world was shifting beneath their feet. Every mile felt like a lifetime. The horror was not a sudden strike, but a slow realization. They were small. They were fragile. The Arctic was a giant that did not even notice it was crushing them. Seppala closed his eyes for a second to protect them from the stinging needles. In the darkness, he heard the ice scream. It was the sound of 1,000 glass windows shattering at once. They were dancing on the edge of a grave. The first blood had not yet been spilled, but the atmosphere of the tomb was already closing in. The dread was a physical weight, heavier than the sled itself. They pushed forward into the void. There was no landmark. There was no light. There was only the pulling of the harness, and the terrifying suspicion that they were heading toward a ledge that had no bottom. The descent into the abyss was not a fall. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through a world that had forgotten the sun. Time had no meaning anymore. There was only the rhythm of the sled and the cold. They had been on the moving ice for hours. The surface beneath them was no longer solid ground. It was a living, breathing creature of salt and slush. It groaned under the weight of the desperate mission. Then came the ice lung. It started as a dry, hacking sound from the middle of the pack. One by one, the dogs began to cough. The air was minus 50 degrees, and it was turning into glass. Every breath they took shredded the delicate lining of their throats. In the pale, flickering light of the lantern, Seppala saw the spray of crimson. Tiny drops of blood hit the snow, freezing instantly into red pearls. The dogs were flagging. Their muscles were turning into stone. The cold had moved past the skin and into the marrow. Seppala watched their gait change from a steady trot to a ragged, stumbling limp. He had to stop. To continue was to murder them all. He knelt in the swirling drift, his own joints screaming in protest. He reached for the first dog. His hands were numb, clumsy blocks of wood. He began to massage their limbs. He rubbed the frozen muscles of their thighs, trying to force the blood to move. It was a gruesome necessity. Without the heat of his touch, their legs would simply die. Necrosis was the silent enemy. If the flesh turned black, the race was over. Seppala worked in the dark, his breath coming in short, frozen gasps. He was fighting the frost for the life of his team. One dog did not stand back up. Her name was Fox. She lay in the snow, her eyes glazed and distant. Her heart was still beating, but her spirit had been crushed by the weight of the gale. Seppala did not leave her. He could not. He lifted her limp body and placed her onto the sled. She was dead weight now. She was another 30 pounds for the rest of the team to pull. The burden grew heavier. Every mile was a victory bought with agony. The dogs pulled with their heads down, their tails tucked tight against the wind. They were no longer a team. They were ghosts. The body horror of the Arctic became their reality. Seppala's own cheeks had turned a waxy, translucent white. He could no longer feel the bridge of his nose. The skin was beginning to peel away in layers. Hunger was a dull, constant ache. It was not the hunger of a missed meal. It was the hunger of a furnace that had run out of fuel. His body was starting to consume itself, to keep his heart beating. The sounds of the night were a symphony of madness. The wind played the wires of the harness like a harp of bone. The ice under the runners shrieked. It sounded like the voices of the dying children. He looked at Togo. The old leader was still moving. His fur was a crust of white salt and ice. His breathing was a wet, heavy whistle. He was the only thing keeping the nightmare from becoming a grave. They were sinking deeper into the madness of the whiteout. The descent was complete. They were no longer men and dogs. They were just moving parts of a machine that was slowly, inevitably breaking apart in the dark. The end of the world arrived as a jagged edge of shadow. They had reached the limit of the drifting ice. Ahead lay a chasm of churning, obsidian water that separated the flow from the solid shore. The gap was a leap of faith across 5 feet of liquid death. The Bering Sea swirled in the dark, a freezing soup of slush and crushing bergs. There was no bridge. There was only the void. Leonhard Seppala looked at the shore. It was so close, yet it might as well have been on the moon. He looked at Togo. The dog stood at the very lip of the abyss, his ears flat. The command was a raw bark from a throat scarred by frost. Togo did not hesitate. He launched his small, battered body into the air. He was a gray streak of lightning against the velvet black of the night. He landed on the solid ice, his claws scratching for a hold. But the weight of the sled behind him was too much. The harness lines, coated in a thick shell of rime, groaned and snapped. The leather traces fell away. They hissed as they slid into the dark, freezing water. The umbilical cord was cut. The team began to drift backward, pulled by the hunger of the open sea and the gale. Seppala felt the floor of the world sliding away. He was trapped on a raft of ice that was shrinking by the second. Without the lead lines, he was a captain without a rudder in a storm. Togo did not run. He did not wait. He turned back toward the churning water. He plunged his head into the freezing slush, his eyes stinging from the salt and the cold that could stop a heart. He found the line. He bit down with everything he had left. His teeth sank into the frozen leather. He braced his paws against the edge of the shore ice, his neck muscles bulging like iron cables. The dog became the anchor. He held the entire weight of the team and the sled against the current of the ocean. He was one small animal fighting the gravity of a planet that wanted him dead. Seppala watched in stunned silence. He saw the sheer will of a creature that refused to let go. He grabbed the remaining lines and heaved. Every muscle in his back screamed as he pulled with the dog. Inch by agonizing inch, the sled moved forward. The runners bit into the solid shelf. With one final, collective surge of power, the team clawed their way out of the mouth of the freezing abyss. They lay on the hard ground, gasping for air. The sound of their breathing was the only thing louder than the wind. They had cheated the sea. They had crossed the uncrossable bridge of the sound. The climax of the journey was not a victory lap. It was a miracle of gristle and bone. Togo stood up, his legs shaking with a tremor that would never truly stop. He had saved them. The serum was still dry. The dogs were still alive. But the cost was written in the blood on Togo's muzzle and the hollow, haunted look in Seppala's eyes. They had looked into the eye of the beast. The shore was solid, but the storm was not over. They had broken the back of the distance, but the price of the leap was yet to be paid. They turned their faces toward the final miles. The handover point at Golovin appeared through the gloom like a ghost ship. It was a small, lonely cabin buried in the drifts. Lay on hard, Seppala steered his broken team toward the dim orange glow of a single window. He reached the threshold and handed the precious cargo to Charlie Olson. His task was finished. He had carried the serum across 260 miles of frozen purgatory. He had defied the gods of the Arctic. The world would soon wake up to headlines about the finish line. The cameras would flash for Balto, the dog who ran the final miles into Nome. The headlines would sing of the last leg and the final hero. But the true story remained behind in the quiet. Freezing huts of the coast. Seppala did not look for a parade. He looked for a warm corner for his dogs. He looked at Togo, who had collapsed in the straw. The king was broken. The old leader lay with his paws tucked under his chest, his breathing a thin, whistling rasp. He had given every ounce of his life to the sled. He had nothing left to give. Togo would live, but he would never lead again. The great heart was still beating, but the joints were fused by the cold. The muscles that had anchored a team against the Bering Sea were now silent and stiff. Seppala sat in the dark cabin, his frozen fingers stroking the gray fur of his friend's head. There was no bitterness in the silence. He knew what they had done. He knew the names of the children who lived. The legacy of 1925 is not found in statues of bronze. It is found in the DNA of every husky that runs the trail. It is found in the survival of a town that should have been a graveyard. Nature had tried to kill them 1,000 times. It had used the wind, the ice, and the dark as its weapons. Yet, the small, gray dog and the man of iron had walked through the fire and come out cold. History is often a loud, shouting thing, but the truth is usually quiet. It is the sound of a man tending to his dogs in a dark room. It is the weight of a hand on a loyal head. They had covered 420 miles in total. It was a distance that defied reason. It was a journey that broke the records of men and the bodies of beasts. All for a small box of medicine. As the sun finally broke over the horizon of 1925, the fever in Nome began to break. The children opened their eyes. They breathed the cold air of a new morning, unaware of the cost. Seppala remained in the shadows of the unsung. He watched the light hit the snow. He did not need the world to know his name. He only needed Togo to breathe one more time. In the quiet, the story ends here, on the edge of the world. A man, a dog, and a frozen silence that will last forever. They were the thin line between a town and the void. They were the kings of the white,